Good evening. I'm Mike Marza, recapping what has been another key day in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. The third week of testimony began today following the holiday weekend, and the federal sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs resumed. Taking the stand today, Combs' former personal assistant, Capricorn Clark. Clark testifying about the times that she says she was held against her will several times. She testified that she witnessed Combs assaulting his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, and she says there were even threats of murder. In just a moment, we'll be joined by ABC News legal contributor Bernarda Villalona to talk about everything that happened in court today. But first up, Darla Miles with a recap from Lower Manhattan.
In court Tuesday morning, Capricorn Clark, a former employee of Bad Boy Entertainment, in tears as she walked jurors through incidents with Sean Combs when she was kidnapped at gunpoint, assaulted at his Miami estate, and her life was threatened. Prosecutors asking, how often did Mr. Combs make threats to you? Clark responding, often. The LA native testifying when she was first hired in 2004 that Combs and a member of his security team took her to Central Park at night, saying he didn't know that I had anything to do with Suge Knight, and if anything happened, I would have to kill you. And again in 2011, Clark testifying that Combs told Cassie and her to make sure Kid Cudi did not report the home break-in to police, and if you don't convince him of that, I'll kill all you expletive. Telling the court about a third time the night of the Kid Cudi break-in, saying, I should kill all you expletive and I should cut her face. Clark copied on this December 2011 email that Cassie Ventura sent to her mother, citing threats to hurt Scott Mescudi, the actor and musician known as Kid Cudi, whom she had just started dating. Defense attorneys challenging Clark's version of the story, asking, is it true that you went so he wouldn't do something stupid? Clark answering no. The defense attorney asking again, you're saying you didn't want to go and you told him you didn't want to go and went with him anyway? She says, yes, sir. I went because he told me I didn't have a choice. Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, with the style of repeating the same question multiple times, asking again, if anything happened, you would be out of a job, right? Clark responding, I didn't want to go, sir. Agnifilo working to chip away at Clark's credibility, introducing an old text message that reads, totally unrelated to our conversation, but did you know that I had the biggest crush on you before I started working with you? Agnifilo asking Clark, do you remember telling Mr. Combs you had a crush on him ever since going back? Clark responding no. Agnifilo asking again, do you remember telling him you had the biggest crush on him? Clark responding, I don't remember this text. Now, Clark was the only witness to take the stand today. Her testimony has ended and court has ended for the day. Court will resume tomorrow morning with the testimony of an LAPD officer and an LAFD arson investigator.
Well, our thanks to Darla Miles out there. You were in court as well, actually sitting right by Darla. You heard a lot today from Ms. Clark on the stand all day. What was the biggest takeaway before we dig into some of the details here?
Oh, my God. Biggest takeaway that she was first a former personal assistant of Diddy Combs and the years that she worked within Diddy's camp. So we knew she had a lot of inside information. But in terms of the most damning testimony, I think it's a three-part. One, when she was kidnapped multiple times, having to deal with her, forcing her to undergo a lie detector test. Secondly, when she was kidnapped, in order for Diddy forced her to go to Kid Cudi's house, and that Combs had a gun on him, because we heard testimony before having to deal with Kid Cudi and that Diddy had went to the home, but not that he had a gun on him and was going there to actually shoot him. So I think those were the most standout parts of today's testimony, having to deal with Capricorn Clark.
All right, so let's rewind a little bit. You mentioned the lie detector test. She testified that there was a big man, like 5 times her size,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Which ended up being one of the security guards of Sean Combs, and there was a point where Sean Combs accused Capricorn Clark of stealing jewelry that was loaned to him, 3 pieces, right, from Jacob the jeweler, well-known jeweler in the hip-hop world in particular. But there was some sort of event. It was a white party, I believe, in the Hamptons, correct?
Yes.
And then the jewels went missing.
Yes.
She was blamed for taking them. Take us through that testimony and how that played in the courtroom.
So in terms of that testimony, and this came early on during her testimony in her direct examination by the prosecutor. So the prosecutor had asked her when did she start working for Sean Combs, and actually it was pretty early in her employment. But that Sean Combs was going to travel and that he had gotten some jewelry from Jacob the jeweler. In fact, there was 3 pieces, one of them having to be a chain with a large cross on it. And that Capricorn was in charge of getting that jewelry to the next location. At some point while they are traveling, Capricorn realizes, oh my God, where's the jewelry? And she lets Diddy know, as well as Diddy's camp know, that the jewelry is missing. She doesn't end up traveling with Diddy Combs. Instead, what Diddy has happened to her is that a security guard accompanies her to her home. They search her house to see if the jewelry is there. And then the very next day, they take her from the house and take her to this like abandoned like building, no furniture, the floors were undone.
Because I believe it's where they were refurbishing to make it the new Bad Boy
headquarters.
But
she didn't even know that.
It was like a folding table, right?
It was like a scene from a movie, like a mob boss movie. So they have her in the middle of this room with a 6-foot-long table, and you have a man who's 5 times her size and talking about that she has to pass this test, or if not, they're going to find her body in the East River. So she undergoes this lie detector test. They lock the door. She's not able to leave the location, so she stays there for long hours. Test is inconclusive. Security guard takes her back to her home, picks her up the next day, another lie detector test. Still not conforming with the test. Take her home, bring her back the next day.
And this is the kidnapping, right?
Yes. So before we thought the kidnapping had to do with Diddy taking her to Kid Cudi's house, but here we have 2 different sets of kidnapping. We have the kidnapping to take this lie detector test where she's not free to go, and then you have the kidnapping of her being forced to go to Kid Cudi's home. So again, riveting testimony, and the jurors were taking a lot of notes as she was testifying, because she also was so emotional. Like, her voice cracked. I would say at least 75% of her direct examination, it was like her voice was cracking where she was at the verge of tears doing this testimony.
So it was interesting because you hear that and you hear the emotional testimony that she gave, but then you see the text messages that the defense put up saying, did you know I had a crush on you?
Yeah, but I'm not concerned because, Mike, let's think back. So Capricorn Carter, she started working with Diddy probably like in her late teens, early when she was like 20-something. We're talking about text messages from almost 20 years ago.
Gotcha.
So you're going to remember every text message, and especially while she was young at that she sent to Sean Combs. I'm curious to know how was it that the prosecution was able to get those text messages, whether she had in her possession a phone or phones, her old phones, or whether this is from Sean Combs' phone that they were able to get that. Again, we're talking about many years ago.
And prosecutors are trying to put this into the context of the enterprise part, right?
Yes. So I'll tell you this, Mike, that today was the most productive day when we are talking about racketeering conspiracy.
Gotcha.
For the prosecution proving the racketeering conspiracy. Why do I say that? Capricorn Clark, an insider, former personal assistant of Combs, had known him for several years, was able to put together what's the criminal enterprise? Who are the co-conspirators? Who's working with Diddy to further these criminal acts? And today, Capricorn Clark was able to tie it in with the security guard. The security guard, one that took having to deal with the lie detector test, and also the security guard who was in the car and drove to Kid Cudi's house when Sean Combs had a firearm in his possession. So they were able to put evidence as to the enterprise portion and who was involved, and also as to the racketeering predicate acts, which you have to prove 2 of those in order to find Sean Combs guilty of racketeering conspiracy, where he faces up to life. And here you have one of those acts being the kidnapping.
Let us borrow your legal hat. Predicate acts. What is that exactly?
So for racketeering conspiracy, it's not enough that you prove that there's a criminal enterprise. You have to prove that the criminal enterprise acted in a pattern of racketeering activities. Here, the prosecution has laid out specific acts having to deal with kidnapping, arson, sex trafficking, bribery, like those are some of the crimes that are listed out in the indictment. So even though those are a plethora of crimes, the prosecution only has to prove 2 of those in order for Sean Combs to be found guilty of the racketeering conspiracy.
One more point on today's testimony. It was the point when Kid Cudi's life, according to the testimony from Ms. Clark, was threatened by Sean Combs.
Oh, yes.
And this is the second time now. We heard about the Suge Knight incident before. But Kid Cudi, and to catch people up, Kid Cudi had briefly dated Cassie Ventura. We know the history that Cassie Ventura had with Sean Diddy Combs, which is really at the center of this case. What was that testimony about the threats on Kid Cudi's life?
Yes, so in terms of the threats on Kid Cudi's life, Capricorn Clark testified that Sean Combs threatened the life of Kid Cudi to actually unalive Kid Cudi on multiple occasions, not just one, but specifically on the day where Capricorn Clark was kidnapped and forced to go to Kid Cudi's home, that Sean Diddy Combs went there armed with a firearm to kill Kid Cudi. And that on other occasions, separate from that Capricorn Clark was charged with, from Sean Combs, like, you better make sure that he does not talk to the police, if not, if his life that's actually in danger. So now we have Sean Combs, not just that he had a gun when they went after Suge Knight, but now we have him with a gun when he goes after Kid Cudi. Plus, take into account the AR-15s that were recovered inside of his house during the search warrant. So this is a different light that the prosecution was able to paint Sean Combs in.
And we know Kid Cudi's car was firebombed.
Yes.
Now, who did it? That's up for, you know, the part of the testimony that we expect to hear tomorrow from this fire expert, right? This LAFD, right?
Yes, but the fire expert's not going to be able to tell you that Sean Combs is a person that was personally responsible for firebombing or placing this Molotov cocktail inside of this car, because number one, no one was cooperative with the investigation. In fact, Capricorn Clark, she was questioned, or they wanted to question her, and she hung up the phone and didn't participate in this questioning. So, Mike, just to be fair as to both sides, so we laid out what the prosecution proved with Capricorn Clark. The defense, in terms of their cross-examination, Mark Anifilo did the cross-examination, was able to make some good points for his side in the sense of proving that, look, Cassie, she was an artist, she wasn't an excellent artist, but she had opportunity to further her career, so that doesn't mean that she was under the thumbnail of Sean Combs when we're talking about coercion. Also, they made some leeway in terms of prior inconsistent statements that Capricorn Clark had made that's different than the statements that she gave while she was on the stand. Now, in the end, the jury was taking notes during direct examination and during cross-examination, but I think the prosecution is going to have some loose ends that they'll have to explain in terms of those inconsistencies that Capricorn Clark gave to this jury today. Turning our attention to tomorrow, we also heard today from the prosecution, outside the jury, I believe, but from the prosecution, that their case is actually going quicker than we initially thought. Yes, and I have to give great praise to the judge, because the judge has been running a tight ship. First off, the lunch breaks are like 30 minutes. Were 30 minutes for the first few weeks. It was just today that they extended it 45 minutes. I think we may even have had an hour today. So he definitely makes sure that the prosecutor is not wasting the jurors' time in the sense of having a witness prepared and available at all times, so the jury is not just sitting there and they're not ending early because a juror witness is not available. But in terms of the prosecution, yes, they do believe that they're going to end much earlier than they thought, but we still don't know whether the defense is going to put up a case. My understanding, I believe that the defense is going to call one witness, which is a clinical forensic clinician, to come in, a psychologist to come in and testify. So that may be one of the witnesses that we see on the defense side. And then finally, do we glean anything from the prosecution being ahead of schedule? What does that tell us as we're trying to read the tea leaves? Well, it's quite possible, and we don't know yet, that maybe one of their key witnesses may not be testifying, but we don't know. They have until the last day right before they rest to bring that witness forward. I know that they've been having issues with bringing a certain witness forward even before they started the trial. In fact, there were arguments from both sides where the defense didn't want the prosecution to be able to mention that name of that victim or that witness because they didn't believe that the prosecution would be able to bring that witness in front of this jury. So that may be the case, but also they've streamlined the evidence in the sense of that a lot of the evidence now they want to bring in charts. So with the charts, they claim that the charts would save the prosecution days of testimony. So if the judge allows those chart summaries, that is going to save time on the prosecution's part. And we heard that today outside of the presence of the jury, that they want to submit these charts into evidence to save a few days off from the jury having to hear boring testimony.
We'll see. We'll see. Certainly has not been boring today.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Definitely a lot to get to. And there is more tomorrow. Court resumes tomorrow morning, so stay with Eyewitness News and ABC-7NY for all the updates. We have a real-time blog, by the way. All the updates coming straight from the courthouse, straight from the courtroom. You can follow those details, again, at ABC-7NY.